This is an extremely important video. I'm going to be the first media commentator in Britain to tell you about the way that Pakistan has begun a process of ethnic cleansing in the United Kingdom. We've seen previous phases, but this phase, I believe, is the most dangerous. But in this video, I'm not going to tell you that I dislike Muslim people or dislike the faith of Islam. I'm going to tell you that just in the same way as we now accept it was wrong for British people to colonise Pakistan, I believe that equally we should accept that the mass importation and colonisation of the United Kingdom by Pakistanis is a mistake, and the idea that we are going to start throwing out our own British people onto the streets for foreign migrants is completely unacceptable. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please do support the Patriot Club. That is a way, a Patriot Fund, it is a way to support patriotic projects in the United Kingdom. Okay, let me explain to you something. 70% of people living in social housing now in London were not born in the United Kingdom. It's a similar figure in places like Manchester and Birmingham. You think this is a simply extraordinary thing, and I never understood how it was happening. But now I actually have discovered and made some amazing leaps of understanding of all of this. So, as you know, there is a housing list and there's a way of getting to the top of it, and there's other ways of getting to the bottom of it. If you're a healthy guy with family support, it's quite hard to get a council house. If you're someone who's left on your own, it's quite easy. But of course, the houses that are controlled by housing associations effectively are owned by them. And so what they are able to do is take over boards of housing associations, and then they can put in their own people by fudging the details. Now, I'm going to tell you about what's going on with Pakistanis simply because, look, I've no problem with Pakistanis. I have to say one of my favourite foods is nihari, halim, pretty close behind. The reason I talk about Pakistanis particularly is because it's them that's doing it. Although also, Pakistan is a very, very corrupt society. And therefore, when people come over from Pakistan and are left to their own devices and are not anglicised, then that level of corruption will come across. Let me tell you about where I live. I'm not going to name the development, but it is a development now that has been earmarked for Pakistani settlers, not for people to come in and integrate, but for it to become an Urdu-speaking Muslim community exclusively reserved for Pakistanis. Now, that will take a period of time to move out the existing residents, and there's no point in giving you the actual specific details of that development because A, it causes me trouble with my neighbours, but B, more importantly, it's just one example, and the fact that I've noticed it at my place is not that of that much interest to you, if you see what I mean. Here's what's important. What has happened is the Housing Association Board is now Pakistani controlled. And what they've done is they've brought over their first resident, just the first. This person didn't live in Pakistan 3 weeks ago. They've moved over specifically to come and live in this development as a settler. Equally, they work for the Pakistani tax office and have told people that they're actually quite well paid. Well, how on earth has somebody managed to move directly from Pakistan and get a house in the UK? It's because they were given emergency housing. The Housing Association pretended that this person was entitled to emergency provision, and that enabled them to allocate a property. Now, I have given you just one example of what I think is now going to be a bigger issue. Because right across the country, these housing associations are controlled increasingly by Pakistanis, and the houses we know are going to Pakistani migrant families. And I believe it's because they've fudged the criteria illegally, but they've nonetheless got away with it. Now, what is going to happen as a result of this? It will mean that whole estates will now become Pakistani dominated. What has happened also is that we have seen, certainly at my development, the social housing contingent have been told that they will have to leave. They've been sent eviction orders. They're currently fighting that eviction order, but they are being evicted in favour of Pakistani families who do not yet live in Britain. Now, that goes beyond accepting migration for key workers. That goes beyond bringing families to the country when they marry into Britain. That goes beyond people claiming asylum. This is straight out saying we are moving in a group of people in order to change your community, in order to create Urdu-speaking enclaves, in order to create settlements. And in those settlements, we know that Sharia courts have the whip hand, and that's something that can be incredibly dangerous because it's not about equal justice. And so now, anytime there is a social housing development in the fullness of time, what that will mean in practice is that Pakistani settlers, and indeed settlers from across the Islamic world, will move to Britain. Now, I'm sat here in News UK, and I've got some very lovely friends from the Sun newspaper, but I must rebuke them for something, the video that they made, video that they spotted and put on the front page of their newspaper twice. It was a man who had come over from, I forget, somewhere in the Islamic world, and he was saying to people, he said he put his finger up to the sky as he arrived in Britain. He wasn't pointing at the sky. He was saying there is only one God, Allah. That's what that means. When they do it like that, it means exactly the same thing. It is an Islamic nationalist symbol. Nothing wrong with that in Pakistan. More of a problem for us in the UK. And then he said the next thing. Yes, it costs £10,000 for people smugglers to get you to the United Kingdom, but what would Allah want you to do? He wouldn't want you to be stingy. He wouldn't want you to be selfish. He'd want you to pay out for the greatness of Allah. What is he saying here? He's not saying don't pay your £10,000 because you don't want a job in the UK. He's talking about this idea of diluting the British population. He's talking about settling large numbers of people from the Islamic world, not because they need to be here, but because they want Britain to be part of a wider Islamic world. It's part of the Pakistani imperial agenda to bring Britain as an Urdu-speaking Pakistani country. Now, will Britain become an Urdu-speaking Pakistani Muslim country? No, it won't. But what we are seeing nonetheless is something that I think will be damaging to the United Kingdom when we have a two-tier country. Because believe me, it won't take long before these areas, which already have their own independent court system, already have a separate police and political system revolving around the mosque, before they ask for autonomy. Certainly we've seen that in India. As the Muslim population has grown, there have been calls for there to be specialist administrative zones, and indeed the creation of Pakistan itself is kind of the ultimate example of that, because India was one country prior to a series of states that had a Muslim population demanding that separate control. And I could see it very, very easily happening in Britain, where Burnley, Blackburn and the East End of London say, look, we are no longer British and we want to have our own, not perhaps country to start with, but our own, say, borough, which would be administered in our own way. That is incredibly dangerous, and it is certainly not something that we were told about when we voted against, as we always have done, uncontrolled immigration. And so I've said to you before that there is a very grave risk with uncontrolled immigration. But I think to take this next step is a major step for Britain and a major step for the West. That step being to suddenly decide now that we are now bringing people to the country for the sake of bringing them to the country, in order to make Britain an Islamic state. And that is something that we need to stop. Now, what are we going to do next? Well, I'm going to tell you that I'm firmly against social housing. The reason I'm against it is because your family and my family are not going to benefit. What will happen is the social housing at 25% or 40%, if you want to go with no-brainer Rainer, those will now go to people who've moved in to the country. So what will happen is the cost of housing will increase, and the benefit will be for the Pakistani imperial agenda of moving people to the United Kingdom. So opposing social housing is absolutely vital. But I think also we have to, and I've talked about this multiple times, we have to go with this idea that Denmark has of having the war is over, it's time to go home, foreign criminals, time to go home, and also, most importantly, non-Western zone prohibition. That is to say that if you move to Britain, every single ward in Britain must be predominantly British. Those wards that are now predominantly Pakistani, those boroughs that are now, or wards rather, that are predominantly Bangladeshi, or indeed anything else, groups of those people have to move out. How can you treat people like this? No. Then what happens is priority is given in housing to moving British families back in, to ensure that areas remain English speaking. remain British and remain predominantly Christian. Decent migrants, i.e. my friends who are Pakistani, have no dog in this hunt, by the way, and they absolutely do not support the idea of this sort of ethnic cleansing. They do not support Britain becoming a majority Muslim country with Sharia courts and Sharia law. But there are people, particularly more recent migrants to this country, who see this as an opportunity. Someone like Sadiq Khan, who is not involved in this housing scam. What he is somebody who believes that Britain is a virgin territory that is ripe for the taking over. Please do support the Patriot Fund. The link is in the description. Until next time, goodbye.